let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature that you wish to discuss. I don't hear you. I don't hear you. No, no. What have I done wrong? I heard you before. Oh, now.
Okay. I heard this story about someone who was in Nazi labor camp and who was a friend managed to escape, and then they somehow got a notice that the people, the German in the camp, promised to kill like every 10th person or some big number of person if they do not return, and that person has returned, decided to return. So was it correct halachically?
Well, this is, of course, a very important question and a very difficult question. But let me begin with the example of Shimon ben Bichri. He's mentioned in Tanakh and mentioned in the Gemara. And the story is as follows. The enemy, the army of the enemy, surrounded the Jewish town. And they said, we want Shimon ben Bichri. If you give us Shimon ben Bichri, we will, that's all we want, and we'll kill him and we'll go away. If you don't give us Shimon ben Bichri, we're going to kill everyone. So now they had to decide what to do. And according to the Gemara, it is wrong to cause the death of Shimon ben Bichri by handing him over to the enemy, and therefore there's nothing to be done to save the situation. If Shimon ben Bichri had been guilty of a real crime, and the enemy wanted him because he was guilty of a real crime, then they could hand him over to the enemy. Otherwise, not. Okay, now that's the situation in the Gemara. What you're talking about is not exactly the same. What you're talking about is the reverse. Here, the Jew had already escaped from the prison, and now the question is whether he should surrender himself or herself, it could have been a woman, whether he or she should surrender themselves in order to save the other Jews. Now, the rule for this is discussed by Rabbi Akiva in the Gemara. Rabbi Akiva discusses a situation of two people who are traveling through, two Jews who are traveling through the desert together, and they only have enough water for one person. The one person has water, the other person ran out of water, doesn't have any more water, and the amount of water that one person has is only enough for him. And either he drinks it and the other one dies, or they share the water and they both die. That's the situation. According to Rabbi Akiva, chayecha kodmim, your life takes precedence over the other person's life, and the person who owns the water should drink it himself, even though that means the other person is going to die. In the situation which you described, which is, of course, a horrible situation, and one hopes one should never be in such a situation. My advice would be: you already escaped from the Nazis. You are not halachically obligated to sacrifice yourself. You're not halachically obligated to sacrifice yourself and go back into the Nazi camp. You're not halachically obligated to do that. If you choose to do it, you are permitted to risk your life to save others, just like a fireman is allowed to risk his life to run into a burning building to save other people. You are allowed to do that if you wish to, but you're not obligated to do it.
Thank you.
Oh, but one
This
hopes,
is a theoretical question.
yes, one hopes, of course, that these things will never happen. So, in any event, what I want to talk about today is Kiddush. But do you have another question you want to ask before I turn to Kiddush? Let me see if I remember how to get this stuff on the screen. I go like this. I go like, oh, I think I did it. Now, when we talk about the halachot, when we talk about the laws of Kiddush, no, when we talk about the laws of Shabbos, we usually focus the discussion on things which are prohibited, what you're not allowed to do. We spend an awful lot of time and energy talking about what is prohibited on Shabbos. And that's good. That's important. Everyone has to know. Everyone has to know what is prohibited. That's important. But it's also important to devote some time and energy to the positive mitzvahs of Shabbos, what we should do. It's important to know not only what we should not do, it's also important to know what we should do. Well, Kiddush is a kiyum. Kiddush is a fulfillment of the Torah mitzvah, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadisho, one of the Ten Commandments. Remember, Shabbos day is one of the commandments, and how do we do that? Well, one of the ways we fulfill the mitzvah of Zachor es Yom HaShabbos is by making Kiddush. Now, um, uh, just like all of the other mitzvahs of Shabbos, similarly, the mitzvah of Kiddush applies equally to men and women. The mitzvah is exactly the same for men and women, um, just as one man can make Kiddush for other people. The other people just listen and say Amen. Similarly, a woman can make Kiddush for other people, and the other people just listen and say Amen. Now, according to the Mishnah Brura, and this is the mainstream thinking of the great poskim, according to the Mishnah Brura, a woman making Kiddush for other people should do so only in the family circle, but not in a public way, not with other people from outside the family circle. The reason the Mishnah Brura says this, the Mishnah Brura explains, within the family, the other people who are listening to Kiddush and saying Amen will be respectful and pay attention and do the mitzvah correctly by listening and saying Amen. Outside the circle, the Mishnah Brura says, back in those days, and probably true today in many places, outside of the family circle, many men will not relate seriously to a woman. They will not pay attention, and they will not do the mitzvah correctly by paying attention, listening, and saying Amen. Now, this might strike you as strange, but as recently as when I was oh dear, am I allowed to talk about my past? I used to be a university student. I know that's a horrible thing, and one should never do that, but it's one of, well, I was a university student, and the Shomrei Torah, the Orthodox students in the campus, we had a kosher kitchen where we always ate together. And on Shabbos, one of the students would make Kiddush for everyone around the table. And being very egalitarian and open-minded, the rule was 1 week a male student makes Kiddush for everyone, and the next week a woman student would make Kiddush for everyone, and we alternated weeks. We were about 50-50, about half men, half women, and that's the way we did it. Now, this was not so long ago. I mean, I'm not that old when I was a university student back in the 1970s, but I could not help but notice back in those days, in the weeks when a male student made Kiddush for the assembled group, everyone was quiet and paid attention and said, Amen. In the weeks when a woman made Kiddush for the assembled group, some people saw no reason, some of the students saw no reason to stop their conversations, pay attention, and say Amen. Some of the men did not relate seriously to a woman making Kiddush and pay attention. Well, within the family circle, of course, a woman can make Kiddush for the other people around the table. Outside of the family circle, it all depends. If the people are going to relate seriously to the woman and pay attention and say Amen, all is well. If the men are going to disrespect the woman and continue their conversations and not pay attention, well, this is just silly, and they cannot fulfill their obligation that way. Okay, that's a basic idea. Now, I want to turn to the details of Kiddush. First, should one stand or sit during Kiddush? You've probably seen different minhagim, different practices. Some families, they sit during Kiddush. Other families, they stand during Kiddush. What's the difference between these two approaches? Well, let's see what the Shulchan Aruch says. In the Shulchan Aruch, and you have the exact siman number and paragraph number here. These are the words of the Shulchan Aruch. Omer vayachulu me'umad. The first word in Kiddush is vayachulu, and that should be said standing up. Does it mean only the first word? Maybe. Does it mean the whole first paragraph? Maybe. Some people stand only for the first word, and in a moment we're going to see why the first word is so important, and many people stand for that. Some people stand for the whole first paragraph, Vayachulu, being understood as referring to the whole paragraph. Achakach, after that, you say Boy Priyagofen. Then you say Boy Priyagofen. Now you'll notice that for Boy Priyagofen, the Shulchan Aruch does not say one way or another, whether to stand or sit. Apparently, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't care whether you're sitting or both are okay, stand or sit for Boy Priyagofen, but Vayachulu, whether it's that one word or the whole paragraph, that calls for standing. Achakach Kiddush, and then the last bracha, Baruch Hashem, Mekadesh Shabbos, that's the bracha of Kiddush. Okay, according to the Shulchan Aruch, written by Reb Yosef Karo, the great Sephardic authority, the first word or the first paragraph requires standing. Beyond that, stand, sit, do whatever you want. The Ramah, the Ashkenaz authority, added the following Haggah, the following note. Yachol la'amod b'shas Kiddush. You can stand for the whole thing if you want. It's okay to stand for the whole of Kiddush. Yoter tov l'shev, but it's better to sit. Ah, the Ramah has no objection to people standing. He can smile if people stand for Kiddush. No need to rebuke them. There's nothing wrong with that. But you want my advice, the Ramah says, sit during Kiddush. And even though the Shulchan Aruch says you definitely should stand at the beginning, we don't actually do that. Ashkenazim, back in those days, and still today, many Ashkenaz families that to this very day do not stand. They sit from beginning to end of Kiddush, even for the first paragraph, even for the first word. But we who sit for the whole of Kiddush, which is still a very common minhag amongst Ashkenazim, we who sit for the whole of Kiddush, when we begin Kiddush, the very first word, omdim ketzat, we stand a little. When we say first word, vayachulu, we stand a little like this. Just a little step. Vayachulu, and the rest, we sit down. Vayachulu, and for the rest, we sit down, just not standing fully, just a little bit of rising from the chair for the first word. Why? Lichvod Hashem, this is in honor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ki matchilim yom hashishi vayachulu hashamayim. The first 4 words of Kiddush, yom hashishi vayachulu hashamayim. The first word begins with Yud, the second word begins with Hey, the third word begins with Vav, and the last word begins with Hey. Those are the letters of the holy name of God, the Shem Havaya, the Shem HaMefurash, and in honor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whose initials are in the first 4 words of Kiddush, we stand a little bit like that. Nirmaz Hashem, B'Rashei Tevot. God's holy name is hinted at, is referred to in the first for the initial letters of each word. Okay, up to this point, we have diversity of opinion. According to the Sephardic authority, stand for the first word or the first paragraph. Beyond that, it doesn't matter. According to the Ashkenaz authority, that's okay. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that if you want to do it. But I recommend, the Ramah says, I recommend sitting, except for the first word, calling for a little bit of rising from the chair. That's the Shulchan Aruch. Let's now turn our attention to Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah needs no introduction. Surely the most influential of the poskim in the 20th century. It was published just a little over 100 years ago, in the beginning of the 20th century. The Mishnah Berurah talks about standing for Vayachulu. Hu edus al brias olam shamayim. When we say Kiddush, we are testifying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created heaven and earth, that the universe was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is a statement we are making, as a testimony we are giving, and edus be'inim umad. And when you give testimony before a bet din, before a court of law, you have to stand. Well, not everyone is able to stand, but if you are able to stand, then one has to stand during edus, during giving testimony in a bet din, a rabbinic court. And since testimony requires standing, and this is edus, this is testimony, one should stand for Bayachulu. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. Oh, but the Ramah told us it's better to sit. I understand why standing is preferred. The Mishnah Berurah just explains why standing is better. It's edus, it's testimony. Why then does the Ramah prefer sitting? In this way, Mikrei Tvei, Kiddush b'Makom Suda, this establishes better the link. This makes a stronger connection between Kiddush and the meal. It says in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch, Ein Kiddush, Ella b'Makom Suda. You have to make Kiddush at the location, at the place where you are going to eat. It does no good, for example, to make Kiddush in the sukkah and then eat the meal in the house. Oh, well, maybe the sukkah and the house are right next to each other, and you can see from one to the other. If you can see from one place to the other, that's called the same place. But if you cannot see from one place to another, the sukkah is in one place, you live in down the block in a different place. Well, making Kiddush in the sukkah doesn't help for eating at home. Kiddush must be physically in the place where you're going to eat, that's close enough that you could actually see where you're going to eat. You make a Kiddush in the synagogue and then go home and eat. No good. Absolutely no good. If you want to do that, which is very, very common on Shabbos morning, very, very common in Shabbos morning, that after the davening, people make Kiddush in shul. Well, in order for that Kiddush to be valid, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush on Shabbos morning or any other time, you have to also eat at the location, at the place where you made Kiddush. Make Kiddush in the synagogue after davening on Shabbos morning, you have to eat there. And if you don't eat there, then you did not fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush at all. You have to make Kiddush again before you eat the meal at home. Well, since Kiddush is closely connected with the meal, with eating, and it has to be closely connected with the meal, with the eating, and since you eat sitting down, therefore, Kiddush to be close to, associated with, bound up with the meal, Kiddush should also be recited while you're sitting down. Well, so now we have two different ideas. Number one, the first idea is that Kiddush is edus, testimony, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created heaven and earth. That calls for standing. On the other hand, we have a second idea, the idea that Kiddush is part of the Suda, part of the meal, and it must be together with the meal. And since you eat sitting down, so you should also make Kiddush sitting down. Very good explanation for why one should stand, a very different good explanation for why one should sit. Kevan sheyoshev b'makom sudato be'et Kiddush, if you sit where when you're making Kiddush, that connects Kiddush more to the meal. Now, the Gra, the agrees with this approach. Now, of course, everyone knows that the Gaon of Vilna, was one of the all-time most important poskim back in the early 18th century in Vilna, in Lithuania. But he was so important. His opinions are so weighty that the Mishnah Berurah considers the opinion of the Gra usually to be definitive. There are very few examples where the Mishnah Berurah deviates from the opinion of the Gra. Mishnah Brura almost slavishly, almost always follows the opinion of the Gra. And the Gra said, Kiddush should be part of the Suda. For the Suda, you sit. For the meal, you sit. You should sit as well. That's what the Mishnah Brura said, and many, many Ashkenaz families are following this approach. As I'm sure you know, the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, was not friendly. He was not sympathetic with the Hasidim. This was back in the early days of Hasidus, back in the days when the Hasidic movement was just beginning, and the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, was very unhappy with the Hasidim. So it's not surprising that today it's the non-Hasidic families which sit during Kiddush, following the opinion of the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, that one should sit because it's part of the meal. In Hasidic families, it's not surprising that in Hasidic families, the opinion of the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, carries vanishingly little weight, and therefore in Hasidic families, the most common practice is to stand for the whole of Kiddush. ומטעם אחר, כיוון שאחד חברו, there's another reason why it's better to sit. The other reason why it's better to sit is because in Kiddush, typically one person is making Kiddush for everyone. Now this too is a point of controversy. This too is a point where there are different minhagim, different practices. Let me outline the different practices about one person making Kiddush for everyone. We just had Purim a few weeks ago, and in reading of the Megillah for Purim, that's a big mitzvah on Purim, right? Reading the Megillah Esther. In reading the Megillah, the Gemara says, Berov Am, having a lot of people together, a big reading for the Megillah, Berov Am, having a lot of people together, Hadras HaMelech, that's more honor for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says, small minyanim, which take place every day. Every day of the year, there are these small minyanim all over town for Ma'ariv, for the evening prayers. They should all be canceled for Purim, and everyone in town should come to a single large synagogue, and everyone should be together for Megillah. Berov Am Hadras HaMelech, the more people that you have together doing the mitzvah, the more people joining together to do the mitzvah, the greater is the honor of the mitzvah, the greater is the honor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Reading the Megillah should be in the largest minyan possible. You don't really need a minyan. A private person can read the Megillah by himself or by herself with no one else present. One can fulfill the mitzvah in private, but it's greater honor for the mitzvah and greater honor for HaKadosh Baruch Hu if you fulfill the mitzvah of Megillah by hearing the Megillah in a large minyan, the largest minyan possible. Well, the Mishnah Brura is now applying that idea to Kiddush as well. If everyone around the table is making Kiddush together, simultaneously, at the same moment, one person is saying the words of Kiddush, and everyone else at the same time says Amen, that's Rov Am, that's increasing the number of people who are doing the mitzvah together, and that better. On the other hand, the Gemara also says that if you are doing a mitzvah, any mitzvah in the Torah, it's always better to do the mitzvah yourself instead of having a shliach, instead of having someone do the mitzvah for you. If you cannot light your own Ner Hanukkah because you went to the dentist, I don't care what the reason is, for some reason you cannot light your own Ner Hanukkah, you can call up a friend, a relative, a neighbor, and appoint that person your shliach and say, please light my Hanukkah candles for me. And when the shliach does the mitzvah, it's the person who sent the shliach who gets the credit for the mitzvah. It's the person who sent the shliach who is accomplishing the mitzvah. And then no different than any other shlichut, no different than any other agency. For example, if I go to the market and buy a kilo of tomatoes, well, the tomatoes belong to me. I bought them. Oh, but what if I'm too busy to go to the market and I send a shliach? I say to a friend, a neighbor, a relative, here's some money, go to the shuk, go to the market and buy a kilo of tomatoes for me. And the shliach does it. The tomatoes don't belong to the shliach. Tomatoes belong to the person who sent the shliach. It's the person who sends the shliach who is acting. In the words of the Gemara, yad shliach ki yad sholcho, the hand of the shliach has the status of being the hand of the person who sent the shliach. When the shliach pays for the tomatoes in the market, it's as though the hand of the person who sent the shliach is paying. And when the shliach takes the kilo of tomatoes in his hand, it's as though the hand of the person who sent the shliach is taking the tomatoes. And the tomatoes do not belong to the shliach. They belong to the person who sent the shliach. Well, since it's always better, you can do a mitzvah by sending a shliach. No, not all mitzvahs. Mitzvahs divided into two categories. There's some mitzvahs which depend upon your body. Mitzvah hatluya baguf. A mitzvah which depends upon your body. You can't have a shliach do it for you. You have to do it yourself with your own body, like listening to the shofar. Listening to shofar on your ears have to hear the shofar. If for some reason you cannot go to the synagogue and hear the shofar, it does no good to ask a shliach to go and listen for you. That's a mitzvah. Tuluya baguf. It depends upon your body. It's your ears which have to hear the shofar. But most mitzvahs do not depend upon your body. You can have someone else do the mitzvah for you, like Hanukkah candles, as long as they get lit. It's not your hand which has to light them. You can have a shliach light them for you. Similarly with Kiddush, since it's better to do a mitzvah yourself rather than having someone else do it for you, it's better for everyone to say Kiddush himself rather than just listening to someone and having that person, your shliach, to say Kiddush for you, and you only say Amen. It's better, according to this view, for everyone to make Kiddush themselves. And not surprisingly, the Mishnah Brura is representing the non-Hasidic understanding that everyone doing it together is better. One person makes Kiddush for everyone around the table. The Hasidic families in general, prefer the other approach, that everyone, or at least all the men, should make Kiddush themselves individually rather than having one person make Kiddush for you. You should do the mitzvah yourself. That's one of the differences between Hasidic practice and non-Hasidic practice. And the Mishnah Berurah is on the non-Hasidic side. And since, according to the non-Hasidim, one person is making Kiddush for everyone else, well, they have to join together in order for everyone to be making Kiddush together, where only one person is reciting the words. Well, how are they going to join together? Sitting together is a better joining together. Yeshiva, sitting together is a better joining together, and therefore that's another reason to sit if you prefer the approach that one person makes Kiddush for everyone. If you prefer the approach, the Hasidic approach, that everyone makes Kiddush himself, then this reason for sitting falls away. Lefi Du'arav, Gam Hashomim Tzrichim Le'shev, according to the Gaon of Vilna, everyone, even those who listen, should sit. The one making Kiddush sits in order to join Kiddush together with the meal. Everyone listening sits in order to join together in one single performance of the mitzvah. That's the non-Hasidic approach. Tov l'zeh b'zeh l'chatchila. And it's good to follow this non-Hasidic approach of the Gaon of Vilna. Yesh lama, the Gam da'ato hu rak l'chatchila. The Gra also understood that if you stand, you can fulfill the mitzvah standing. Al kol panim tzarich l'zeh sheyikbu hashomim atzmam yachad im HaKiddush. But the most important thing is that everyone pay attention, everyone focus on Kiddush together in order to fulfill the mitzvah. They shouldn't be mifuzar or mifurad. You don't have people walking around having their conversations during Kiddush. Everyone should come together, join together, and pay attention to what's going on, not walking to and fro and not engaging in their conversations. Okay, that's what the Mishnah Berurah teaches us. Let's see what the other poskim have to say. The Kaf HaChaim, the name of the author was Rav Sofer, here in Yerushalayim. Also, a book was published in the 1920s, well, just 100 years ago. The Mishnah Berurah is probably the single most influential poskim among Ashkenazim. The Kaf HaChaim that we're about to look at is similarly the single most important authority among the Sfaradim. These two Sfarim were published almost exactly at the same time. The Kaf HaChaim is a little bit younger and was published a few years, like 2 or 3 years later, but they're basically contemporaries. And just as the Mishnah Berurah occupies a place of great honor in Ashkenaz communities, similarly, the Kaf HaChaim by Rav Sofer occupies a place of great honor in Sephardic communities. Let's see what he has to say. He quotes the SHiur HaKavanot. SHiur HaKavanot is one of the many Sfarim of the Arizal, the great mystic of Tzfat. Well, actually, the Arizal never wrote any Sfarim at all. All of the Sfarim of the Arizal and this whole shelf full of Sfarim, they were all written by the Talmidim of the Arizal. And this, like, but what people call Kitvei Arizal, the writings of the Arizal, were really written by the Talmidim, but everyone agrees that the Talmidim did a good job of presenting the views of their teacher, the great Arizal. The Arizal Katav didn't actually write it himself. This is what he said. And the Talmidim wrote it down. Tzarich la'amod b'shas Kiddush. The Arizal, for mystical reasons. Up until this point, we've been discussing pure halacha. Now, the Kaf HaChaim introduces Kabbalistic ideas into the discussion. According to the Arizal, the great mystic, Kiddush requires standing. That's what it says in the Shah Kavanot, one of the great Sforim, written by one of his Talmidim. V'chein b'Priyetz Chaim, another Sefer, written by another Talmud of the Arizal, says the same thing. These are his words. Muri, my teacher, it's the Arizal, because the book is written by the Talmud of the Arizal, my teacher, Haya noheg lomar kol hakidushim me'umad b'Shabbat v'Yom Tov. Every Kiddush on Shabbos, on every Shabbos, and every Kiddush on every Yom Tov, the Arizal stood. Achar kach yoshev v'to'em, then he would sit down to actually drink the wine. He wouldn't, or grape juice. He wouldn't drink the wine or grape juice standing. He would sit down. Let me just make a footnote. From the halachic point of view, wine and grape juice are identical. They have exactly the same bracha, and wherever there is a halacha calling for yayin, for wine, grape juice is equally acceptable. Wine and grape juice are halachically identical. The reason for this is that the process of fermentation, the process of changing grape juice into wine is a slow process. It takes a while for grape juice to turn into wine. And there's a fundamental principle of halacha. One of the fundamental principles of halacha is called natata devarecha l'shiurim. Every halacha, in order to be a valid, correct halacha, must have a very precise SHiur, a very precise measure. If there were a halacha difference between wine and grape juice, halacha would have to define exactly what point in the process going from grape juice to wine, at exactly what point does the halachic status change from grape juice to wine? Is it after 10 hours? After 24 hours? Is it after 2 days? Exactly at what point does the status of grape juice change into wine? Halacha would have to say, would have to teach us that. If there were a difference, halacha is totally silent. Mishnah, Gemara, all the poskim are totally silent on changing status at some point between grape juice and wine. It follows, therefore, that there is no difference between them. You can use grape juice or wine whenever the halacha talks about yayin. Okay, well, you notice that the Sephardic approach given to us by Kaf HaChaim is strongly influenced by the Arizal. The Mishnah Brura and his team are very influenced by the Gra, the Gaon Mevilna. The Sephardic authority and his team are very influenced by the thinking and the practice of the Arizal, the great mystic of Tzfat. Not surprisingly, the Hasidim have followed the Sfaradim in this matter, and the Hasidim also prefer to give greater weight to the thinking and the practice of the Arizal. And therefore, on this point, as on so many other issues, the practice of the Hasidim corresponds with the practice of the Sfaradim and not with the practice of the Gra, the Gaon Mevilna, and the Mishnah Brura. Let's see an example of that. The Likutei Mahariach. Likutei Mahariach is a very important Hasidic book detailing Hasidic practices for, well, almost all the mitzvahs. This is what the Hasidic Sefer says. Minhag ha'olam, standard practice, la'amod, ba'amiras ve'yechulu, to stand for the first paragraph. Ach, al pi Arizal, and according to the Arizal, one should make Kiddush standing both on Shabbat and Yom Tov. And that's the opinion embraced by the Hasidim. Well, now we have a better understanding of the foundations of the different practices. The Gaon of Vilna, the Mishnah Brura, and the non-Hasidic groups, they prefer to sit, and we understand their reasons, because they want Kiddush to be firmly joined together with the meal. For the meal you sit, so for Kiddush you sit. They want the people to join together so that one person can make Kiddush for everyone, Berov Am, a greater number of people, fulfilling the mitzvah simultaneously. And this calls for joining together and sitting down. On the other hand, the Hasidic practice is rooted in the thinking of the Arizal, according to whom standing is important because Kiddush is edut, is testimony. We are testifying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're testifying to our emunah, to our belief that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created heaven and earth, and edus, testimony, requires standing, and that's what the Arizal did, and therefore that's what the Saradim do, and that's what the Hasidim do. Let's go one step further. The Arizal was, of course, just after Gerush Sfarad, just after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Rabbi Yehuda Chalatz, that we're about to quote, was also one of the great Mikubalim, one of the great mystics from Spain in that generation. He was a young man at the time of the expulsion from Spain, and he ended up in North Africa. Sod HaKiddush Shel Shabbos. What is the mystical idea underlying Kiddush? Amru Kadmonim, we learn from earlier rabbis, Tzarich liot adam ba'amida boto Kiddush. We know that for mystical reasons, one should stand during Kiddush. Why? What is the mystical reason for standing during Kiddush? We know the Arizal did it, but why did he do it? Why did he stand? Not only because of edus, not only because of testimony, there's nothing particularly mystical about that. Rather, Mipnei shehu kiddushe kala hayadua. Kiddush that we make on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and marriage, man and woman getting married, have exactly the same word. Kiddush, or kiddushin in the plural, the same words refer to marriage and making Kiddush on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's exactly the same word, because the same mystical idea underlies both. In a marriage between man and woman join together and become one. As it says in the verse in Bereshis, V'hayu lebasar echad, they join together and become one. And when we make Kiddush on Shabbos and Yom Tov, the Jewish people are joining together with the well-known bride, namely the Shekhinah, the divine presence. The Jewish people are joining together with the Shekhinah, with the divine presence, and the joining together of the Jewish people with the Shekhinah directly parallels a marriage between man and woman. Lefi Shesheva brachas shel kala hem ba'amida, and since a marriage between man and woman takes place under the chuppah while the chassan and kala are standing, b'shas kiddusheya, while they are getting married, hakol omdim l'chvoda, and everyone stands when the chassan and kala enter the chuppah. And indeed, according to the mystics, everyone should continue standing for the whole of the marriage ceremony. Well, since we stand for an ordinary human marriage between two people, kol shekain, all the more so. Lakala elyona haklula b'chol yofi, all the more so for the divine bride, for the Shekhinah. All the more so should we stand for the Shekhinah, for the divine presence, when the Jewish people join together with the Shekhinah by making Kiddush on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So although the Arizal never actually explained the reason for standing to his Talmidim, all they report is that he did stand, sat down for drinking the wine, but he did stand for Kiddush. One of the contemporaries of the Arizal, Reb Yehuda Chalatz, he explains to us the mystical underlying reason. Kiddush, Leil Shabbos, Kiddush, Shabbos morning, and on Yom Tov as well, is a unification, a joining together of Am Yisrael with the Shekhinah, and therefore the same principles apply here as in ordinary human marriage. Let's go further. Yeshel Avram, written by Rabbi David Varman, what's his name? He was the Rav of Buchach. There's several Svarim with exactly the same name. It's a little bit confusing. Eshel Avram, they're different Svarim written by different people called Eshel Avram. Different commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch all have the same name, which is a little bit confusing. The Rav David Varman, the author of this commentary, he was from Romania, Moldavia. Buchach. No, Buchach is today in Romania, not in Moldavia. He was the Rav Buchach in Romania. In any event, 18th century, no, 19th century. He was Hasidic, and his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch is so important that it's published together with every standard edition of the Shulchan Aruch. And one of the other commentaries written by Rabbi Yosef Ta'olub is also called Eshel Avram and is also published together with every standard edition of the Shulchan Aruch. So whenever people quote the Eshel Avram, they always have to say which one they mean. If it's this one, it's Buchach. If it's the other one, it's called Prima Godim, named after another sefer he wrote. In any event, he was the Rav of Buchach. We just had Yom HaShoah yesterday. As I'm sure you know, much has been written about the Holocaust. Libraries full have been written about the Holocaust. There's plenty of literature out there and many novels about the Holocaust, which try to capture the feeling, the understanding, which try to portray what happened, to make us understand, to help us understand what happened. In my opinion, which I realize is not of great value, in my opinion, the greatest of the Holocaust novels was written by Shai Agnon, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Shai Agnon, one of his great works was Oreach Natal, A Guest for the Night, a great Holocaust novel. In my opinion, it's the one novel which gives you the greatest insight to the Holocaust. And this novel, Oreach Notel Lalun, A Guest for the Night, was written before World War II. It was written before the Holocaust. It was written in the aftermath of World War I. And it's the story of an Israeli, presumably the author himself, who went from Israel back to his hometown in Europe, and he describes the destruction of the town he came from as a result of World War One. And if you want to have a feeling, if you want to have an understanding, if you want to have a perception of the way warfare leads to destruction of a town, Oreach Natal Alun is a brilliant work. The novel begins when the narrator arrives in the town of Buchach. This town where Reb David Varman was the Rav. He arrives there by train on Erev Yom Kippur, and he hurries to get himself settled rents a room to live in someone's house. Hurries up to get himself settled before Yom Kippur, and rushes off to the synagogue for the tefillot on Yom Kippur. And he describes in great detail exactly how the tefillot on Yom Kippur take place in the Beit Knesset, those who survived World War I. And towards the end of Yom Kippur, on late afternoon, a controversy breaks out in the synagogue. Some of the Jews in the synagogue say, we're davening too slow. Let's pick up the speed. Let's daven quicker. Other Jews say, no, it's Yom Kippur. We should daven slowly. And why do you want to rush to finish the prayers? None of us have any food at home to eat after Yom Kippur. That's the way the novel begins, written by SHiur, and it speaks a lot about the role of the rabbi. He never names the rabbi of the town, but it's the Eshel Avram, David Varman, the Rav of Buchach, whom we're about to quote now. He was one of the great Hasidic poets. He says, according to Shulchan Aruch, it's better to sit. Well, we know that. We read the Shulchan Aruch ourselves. It's better to sit. Mishnas Hasidim, but in one of the great Kabbalistic works written by Emmanuel Chayriki back in the 18th century, and in the Siddur of the Arizal, again, not written by the Arizal himself, but by the Talmidim, Reb Shabtai, in those sources, it says flat out that it's better to stand for the whole of Kiddush and to sit only for drinking. Bottom line, it really doesn't matter. Ta'amei da'kolbo, each side of this disagreement has its reasons. The Ramah and those who say to sit have their reasons, and you can follow that approach. That's okay. Those who say to stand, they have their reasons, and it's okay to follow that approach. According to the Eshel Avram, the great Hasidic posek, well, we Hasidim prefer to stand, but there's nothing wrong with the other approach. The Or HaShulchan, one of the great non-Hasidic poskim of Europe, contemporary of the Mishnah Berurah, he takes exactly the same approach. He quotes both systems of thought, those who say you should sit with all the reasons we spoke about, those who say you should stand with all the reasons that we spoke about. He prefers sitting. He was on the non-Hasidic side of the issue, but he too acknowledges that one can equally fulfill the mitzvah in both ways. Elu ve'elu, divrei Elokim chayim, in the words of the Gemara, manda ovid kamar ovid, umanda ovid kamar ovid. You can follow one opinion or you can follow the other opinion. Both approaches are of equal value. You can choose which approach you wish to follow. Bilvad, shetihya kavanatech l'shem shamayim, as long as your kavana in choosing the path you choose, as long as your kavana in choosing the practice you choose, sitting or standing, as long as your kavana is l'shem shamayim, as long as you decide, as long as your decision is motivated l'shem shamayim, if that's your kavana, you've chosen the correct side of the disagreement. If you have ulterior motives, not l'shem shamayim, for choosing whichever side you chose, you've chosen the wrong side. What makes one side right or wrong is dependent entirely upon your kavana. If your kavana is l'shem shamayim, the side you're on is the right side. So these are the principal sources regarding sitting and standing during Kiddush. We're going to pause at this time, and if you have specific issues that you wish to have a SHiur about, feel free to send me an email, and I'll be happy to put together a SHiur on the specific topics that interest you. Otherwise,
Okay.
Thank
you very much.
Choose topics. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Be well, B'hatzlacha, and thank you very much
Thank
for waiting. Shalom.
you.